The evening had started out unremarkably. The Thompson family went about their usual routines, unaware of the extraordinary events about to unfold. Sarah stood in the kitchen, rinsing dishes under warm water as the hum of the dishwasher filled the room. Her husband, Michael, was at the dining table with his laptop open, eyes glued to a spreadsheet. Upstairs, their teenage daughter Lily lay sprawled on her bed, scrolling through social media with her headphones firmly in place, while 80-year-old Ethan was stationed by the living room window. Ethan had developed a fascination with the stray dog that roamed their neighborhood. Tonight, like so many others, the dog was back, lingering just beyond the driveway. Its coat was matted, its frame skinny, yet it carried an air of quiet dignity. Ethan pressed his nose against the cold glass, watching the dog sniff the ground and glance toward the house as if deciding something. The boy ran to the kitchen, tugging at Sarah's sleeve. "Mom, the dog's here again," he said, his voice tinged with urgency. Sarah glanced up, her tired eyes following her son's gaze out the window. There it was, the scruffy figure she'd noticed before. It stood motionless, staring at their house as if it were on guard. "We can't do anything about it, honey," Sarah said gently, drying her hands on a dish towel. "It's probably just looking for food. It'll move on." "But what if it's hungry?" Ethan insisted, his small face full of concern. "Can I give it some of my sandwich?" Sarah hesitated. They didn't have a dog, and the idea of feeding a stray one that might keep coming back seemed like an unnecessary complication. Still, there was something about the boy's plea, his genuine compassion, that made her soften. "Just this once," she said, handing him half a sandwich. Ethan beamed and raced back to the window, but the dog had already disappeared into the shadows. Hours later, the house was quiet. Sarah and Michael had gone to bed, and Lily was asleep with her phone still glowing beside her. Ethan lay curled under his blanket, dreaming of adventures with superheroes and scruffy sidekicks. Outside, the neighborhood was still, the cool autumn air carrying the faint rustle of leaves. But something shifted. A faint glow appeared near the back of the Thompson home, a flickering light that grew brighter with each passing minute. The stray dog returned, emerging from the shadows like a ghost. It sniffed the air, its ears perking at the faint smell of smoke. A low growl rumbled in its throat as the scent grew stronger. It paced the driveway, its body tense, its instincts screaming that danger was near. Then, with a burst of urgency, it began barking this sharp, frantic sound that cut through the quiet night like a siren. Inside, Sarah stirred. At first, she thought the noise was part of her dream, but the barking persisted, loud and insistent. She nudged Michael, who groaned and turned over. "It's just a dog," he mumbled. But Sarah couldn't shake the unease creeping over her. She got up and went to the window. That's when she saw its orange glow flickering against the darkness. For a moment, she couldn't process what she was seeing, but then it hit her like a punch to the gut. "Michael, the house is on fire," she screamed, her voice breaking with panic. Michael bolted upright, his face a mask of confusion and fear. They scrambled out of bed, racing to wake the kids as smoke began to seep into the hallways. Sarah yanked Ethan from his bed, wrapping him in her arms as he coughed and cried. Michael banged on Lily's door, shouting for her to get up. The flames were spreading fast, their crackling roar growing louder by the second. The family stumbled into the hallway, disoriented by the thick, acrid smoke. The front door was blocked by flames, and the heat was suffocating. Lily screamed as a section of the ceiling collapsed behind them, showering them with sparks. Sarah's mind raced, her arms tightening around Ethan as she searched for a way out. Through the chaos, the barking returned, louder and more urgent than ever. The dog appeared in the doorway, its amber eyes glowing with determination. It barked again, pacing in place, then darted toward the side of the house before looking back at them. Sarah froze, her mind struggling to comprehend what she was seeing. "Mom! He's trying to help us," Ethan cried, his voice hoarse from smoke. The dog barked again, this time more forcefully, and the family followed. It led them through the house, its movements quick and deliberate, as if it knew exactly where the danger was and where they needed to go. The flames licked at the walls, the air growing hotter and harder to breathe, but the dog didn't falter. It stopped at a side door that Sarah hadn't considered in her panic, pawing at it and barking until Michael pushed it open. Cool night air hit their faces as they stumbled out into the yard, coughing and gasping for breath. The family collapsed onto the grass, their bodies trembling from adrenaline and exhaustion. The dog limped out behind them, its fur singed, its breath shallow. Sarah reached for it instinctively, pulling it close as tears streamed down her face. It wasn't long before neighbors began to gather, their faces etched with shock as they took in the sight of the burning house. Someone called 911, and within minutes, the distant wail of sirens grew louder. When the fire department arrived, the house was already engulfed, flames shooting into the sky. A firefighter approached the Thompsons, his expression grim yet curious. "How did you know to get out in time?" he asked. Sarah looked down at the dog lying beside her, its chest rising and falling with labored breaths. "It was him," she said softly. "He saved us." Ethan knelt beside the dog, his small hand stroking its head. "You're a hero," he whispered, his voice full of awe. The dog's tail gave a faint wag, as if to acknowledge the words. In the chaos that followed the flashing lights, the hurried voices of first responders, the acrid smell of smoke clinging to the air, Sarah found herself unable to look away from the dog. It wasn't just its bravery that struck her, but the quiet resilience in its eyes. This wasn't just a stray. This was a survivor. The morning after the fire, the Thompson family found themselves in a daze. Exhaustion hung heavy over them, but there was no rest to be had. Their home was gone, reduced to a smoldering skeleton of wood and ash. Neighbors had rallied around them, offering blankets, tea, and reassurance, but the shock had settled deep into their bones. Amid the chaos, one figure remained steadfast, the scruffy dog that had saved them. Michael and Sarah stood on the neighbor's porch, looking at the charred remains of their house as the fire marshal walked them through the damage. Ethan sat on the porch steps, clutching the dog's neck as though letting go would make it vanish. "You're okay now," he murmured to the dog, though it wasn't clear if he was trying to reassure the animal or himself. The dog lay still, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. His fur was singed, his paws raw, but there was a calmness in his eyes that belied his injuries. Sarah crouched down beside Ethan. "We need to take him to the vet," she said gently, brushing her son's hair out of his face. "He's hurt." Ethan looked up at her, his eyes wide with worry. "What if they don't let us keep him?" he asked, his voice trembling. "He saved us, Mom." "We'll figure it out," Sarah promised, though in truth, she had no idea what they would do. Their home was gone, their savings already stretched thin, and now there was this bogus stranger who had done more for them in one night than they could have imagined. A neighbor offered to drive them to the nearest vet. As they loaded the dog into the car, Sarah noticed the way he didn't resist, even when he winced in pain. It was as though he trusted them completely, a level of faith she wasn't sure they deserved. At the veterinary clinic, the atmosphere was tense. The vet, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, examined the dog carefully, her hands moving over his thin frame with practiced gentleness. "He's been through a lot," she said after a while, her tone somber. "Burns on his paws, some minor lung damage from the smoke. But these scars," she gestured to a patch of his side where the fur was uneven and the skin rough. "These are old. He's had a hard life even before last night." Ethan hovered nearby, his hands clasped together as if in prayer. "He's going to be okay, right?" The vet smiled softly. "He's a tough one. He'll heal with some care." They decided to call him Ash, a name that Ethan suggested on the drive home. "Because he came out of the fire, just like a superhero," he explained, stroking the dog's head as Ash rested on the blanket-lined back seat. The name felt fitting, and even Michael, who had been quiet and withdrawn all morning, nodded in agreement. Back at the neighbor's house, the Thompson family set up a makeshift space for Ash in the garage. Ethan refused to leave his side, sitting cross-legged on the floor and reading aloud from his favorite comic book while the dog dozed. Lily joined them after a while, her usual aloofness replaced by a quiet curiosity. "He's like a real-life lassie," she said, snapping a few pictures on her phone. For once, she didn't seem annoyed by Ethan's enthusiasm. Sarah watched from the doorway, her heart aching. She had always thought of herself as a practical person, someone who didn't have time for sentimentality. But seeing her children bond with this scruffy, battered creature who had risked everything for them made her reevaluate what was truly important. Over the next few days, Ash began to heal. The vet had given them ointments for his burns and antibiotics for his lungs, and the family took turns caring for him. Michael, who had initially kept his distance, surprised everyone by staying up late one night to sit with Ash. "He saved my family," he muttered when Sarah found him there, his hand resting lightly on the dog's back. "The least I can do is make sure he's okay." Ethan, however, was Ash's constant companion. He talked to the dog as though they were old friends, sharing stories about school birds. As at unexpected news, "We scanned his microchip again," she said, her voice cautious. "It's faint, but we managed to pull some information. He was registered to someone named James Carter, used to be a firefighter. Does that name mean anything to you?" Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She thanked the vet and hung up, her mind racing. Why would a firefighter's dog be wandering the streets? What had happened to James Carter, and how had Ash ended up here? She knew they needed answers, but part of her was afraid of what they might find. For now, though, the focus was on Ash's recovery. The Thompsons worked together, each of them finding solace in the dog's presence as they grappled with the aftermath of the fire. Their lives had been turned upside down, but in the midst of the chaos, Ash became a symbol of resilience and hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was still something worth fighting for. Ethan summed it up best one evening as he sat with Ash in the fading light of the garage. "You're not just a hero," he said, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Your family." The dog's tail thumped against the floor, and for the first time since the fire, Sarah allowed herself to smile. In the days following the fire, the Thompson family began to damaged, and they were living on the generosity of saved them. It was wandering the streets. Michael, usually the skeptic, surprised Sarah with his enthusiasm for finding out more. "If this guy was a firefighter," he said, pacing the room, "maybe Ash picked up those instincts from him. He let us out of that house like he knew exactly what to do." Sarah made a few calls to local animal shelters and fire departments, hoping someone might recognize the name. It was slow going, but her persistence paid off when a woman at a nearby shelter remembered a James Carter from years ago. "He worked in the next county," the woman explained. "He had a dog. He always talked about how special it was. Let me see if I can pull up any records." The shelter had little information, but it was enough to lead Sarah and Michael to the station where James had worked. They packed the kids into the car, bringing Ash along, and made the drive out to the neighboring county on a chilly Saturday morning. Ash seemed uneasy during the ride, his ears twitching and his head swiveling at every sound. It wasn't until they pulled up to the firehouse that he settled, lying down with a low whine that felt almost like recognition. The firehouse was bustling when they arrived, but the mood shifted when Sarah explained why they were there. One of the firefighters, an older man with a weathered face, listened intently as she described Ash and his role in saving their family. When she mentioned James Carter, his expression grew somber. "I knew James," he said after a pause. "And that dog of his, too. We all did." He invited them into a quiet corner of the firehouse and shared the story. James Carter had been one of their best, a dedicated firefighter who always seemed to have an extra sense for danger. His dog, Blaze, had been his constant companion, trained not just as a pet, but as an unofficial part of the team. Blaze had a knack for spotting things others missed, and James often joked that the dog was better at the job than half the crew. But the story took a darker turn. About 3 years ago, James had responded to a fire in an old warehouse. The blaze had been worse than expected, and while James had managed to get everyone out safely, he'd been caught in a structural collapse on his way out. Blaze had been outside, tethered to a truck, and had watched helplessly as his owner never emerged from the building. After that, the firefighter continued, his voice thick with emotion. Blaze just disappeared. We tried to find him, but he was gone. Some of us figured he couldn't handle it losing James like that. The room fell silent as Sarah processed the story. Ethan, who had been sitting on the floor with Ash, looked up and said softly, "His name wasn't always Ash, was it?" "No," the firefighter said, his gaze shifting to the dog. "His name was Blaze." Ash Blaze whined again, his eyes darting between the firefighter and the family. It was as though he understood the weight of what was being said, though no one could be certain. The firefighter knelt down, holding out a hand. "Hey, boy," he said gently. "It's been a long time." To everyone's surprise, Ash didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, pressing his nose into the man's palm. It was a moment of recognition, quiet and profound, and it left the Thompsons struggling to hold back tears. The firefighter gave them a photograph of James with Blaze, taken on the day they joined the station. In it, James looked young and confident, his arm draped casually over the dog's back. He loved that dog, the man said. Blaze wasn't just his partner. He was family. The ride home was quiet. Ethan clutched the photograph, staring at it with a mixture of awe and sadness. "Do you think Ash remembers him?" he asked finally. "I think he does," Sarah said, her voice soft. In his own way, that night, as the family gathered in their temporary living space, they laid the photograph on the table and talked about James. They learned that he had grown up in the same county as them, just a few miles away, and had been a hero in every sense of the word. But what stuck with them most was the idea that Ash Blaze had found his way back to their house. Whether it was fate, instinct, or some unexplainable connection, it felt like more than coincidence. In the following days, Sarah and Michael delved deeper. They visited James's mother, an elderly woman living alone in a modest house. She welcomed them with a warm smile that faded when they explained why they were there. "Blaze," she murmured, her hands trembling as she reached out to stroke the dog's head. "I thought I'd never see him again." She shared stories about James, her voice thick with pride and grief. She described how Blaze had been James's shadow, always by his side, and how losing him had been the hardest part of her son's death. Blaze was his protector, she said. "I think losing James broke his heart." As they left, James's mother handed Sarah a small leather journal. "He wrote in this sometimes," she said. "Maybe it'll help you understand why Blaze was so special." The journal turned out to be a treasure trove of memories. In one entry, James described Blaze's uncanny ability to sense danger. "Sometimes I think he knows what's going to happen before I do. He saved my skin more times than I can count. I don't know what I'd do without him." Another entry was more personal. "Blaze isn't just a dog. He's my partner, my best friend, my family. If anything ever happens to me, I hope he knows how much he meant to me." Reading those words, Sarah felt a lump in her throat. It was clear that Ash Blaze had been more than a pet. He had been a lifeline, a constant presence in James's life, and now, in some strange way, he had become the same for the Thompsons. By the end of their investigation, the family felt as though they had come to know James, even though they had never met him. His courage, his dedication, and his bond with Blaze had left a legacy that now extended to them. And as they sat together, Ash lying contentedly at their feet, they realized that their story and his was far from over. As the Thompsons pieced together Ash's history, their sense of awe and gratitude for him deepened. What began as a desperate effort to escape a fire had turned into a journey that connected them with a story of heroism and loss spanning years. Yet, Ash's story wasn't merely one of the past that began to ripple through their present, leaving a profound impact on their lives and those around them. It started with Ethan, His bond with Ash grew into something that transcended the usual connection between a boy and a dog. Ethan had always been an imaginative child, but after the fire, his creativity seemed to take on a new purpose. He would sit for hours with Ash, weaving stories about the dog's adventures as a secret firefighter, a protector of those in need. He even began sketching comic strips of Ash the Hero, with Blaze transformed into a caped canine saving people from danger. These moments weren't just play. They became Ethan's way of processing the trauma of the fire and finding courage in its aftermath. Ash seemed to sense Ethan's need for him. He was always at the boy's side, his amber eyes watching intently as Ethan spoke or drew. One evening, as Ethan lay on the floor coloring a picture of Ash leaping through flames, the dog leaned in and gently rested his head on the boy's shoulder. "You're my hero, too," Ethan whispered, and for the first time since the fire, Sarah felt a sense of peace watching them. Ash's presence also began to affect Michael, who had been struggling silently with guilt over the fire. As the head of the household, Michael had always prided himself on being the family's protector, but the near tragedy had shaken him deeply. In Ash, however, he saw a quiet resilience that he couldn't ignore. It started with small moments bringing Ash water, sitting beside him late at night, but gradually, Michael began opening up to Sarah about his fears and doubts. "He saved us when I couldn't," Michael admitted one evening as they sat together in the garage, watching Ash sleep. I think I needed him as much as he needed us." Sarah placed a hand on his arm, her own emotions bubbling to the surface. "Maybe that's why he found us," she said. "We needed him, and maybe he needed us, too." Word of Ash's bravery began to spread throughout their community. Neighbors who had initially offered condolences now came by to meet the dog, who had risked his life for the Thompsons. One elderly woman from down the street brought over a plate of cookies, kneeling beside Ash and whispering, "You're a good boy, aren't you? Such a good boy." Ash accepted the attention with quiet dignity, his tail wagging slowly as if to say, "I was just doing my job." It wasn't long before Ethan decided that Ash's story deserved to be shared more widely. With Sarah's help, he wrote a letter to the local newspaper, recounting how Ash had saved their family and the incredible journey they had taken to uncover his past. The letter was published alongside a photo of Ethan and Ash sitting together, the dog's scarred yet noble face looking directly into the camera. The article struck a chord in the community. Strangers began stopping by to thank the Thompsons for sharing their story, many of them recounting their own experiences with rescue animals. A firefighter from a nearby town even reached out, inviting the family and Ash to visit the station for a special event honoring first responders. The visit was emotional. As they walked through the firehouse, Ethan clutched Ash's leash tightly, his face glowing with pride. The firefighters gathered around, eager to meet the dog they'd read about. One of them, a young woman with a kind smile, knelt in front of Ash and said, "You're one of us, buddy." When the ceremony began, the fire chief shared James Carter's story, painting a vivid picture of his bravery and the bond he had shared with Blaze. He then called the Thompsons to the front, presenting Ash with an honorary firefighter badge. Ethan beamed as he fastened it to Ash's collar. "You've always been a hero," he said quietly, scratching behind the dog's ears. As Ash stood proudly before the crowd, Sarah couldn't help but think of James. This dog had been his partner, his family, and now he was theirs. She felt a pang of sadness for the man they had never met, but also a deep sense of gratitude. In a way, James's legacy had lived on through Ash, connecting their lives in a way that felt almost like destiny. In the weeks that followed, Ash's story continued to inspire. The Thompsons decided to use their newfound platform to advocate for rescue animals, partnering with local shelters to host adoption events and fundraisers. Ethan even created a small comic book about Ash's adventures, selling copies at the events to raise money for the cause. Ash, of course, took it all in stride. Despite his growing celebrity, he remained the same quiet, steady presence, always watching, always listening. But his instincts for danger never wavered. One afternoon, as Sarah was preparing for an adoption event, Ash began barking furiously at the garage door. When she opened it, she found a neighbor struggling with an overloaded generator that had started to spark. Ash darted forward, barking until the man backed away. Minutes later, the generator emitted a loud pop, followed by a thin wisp of smoke. "You saved me," the neighbor said, his face pale as he knelt to pat Ash's head. "You really are a hero." Incidents like this became almost routine. Whether it was alerting the family to a gas leak or nudging Ethan away from the edge of a steep embankment during a hike, Ash's keen instincts and unwavering loyalty proved time and again that he was no ordinary dog. As the months passed, the Thompsons realized just how much Ash had changed their lives. He wasn't just a pet or even a hero, was a part of their family, a reminder of resilience, and a living link to a legacy of bravery that stretched far beyond their own lives. Each day with him felt like a gift, one they cherished deeply. And though Ash couldn't speak, his actions spoke volumes. In the way he watched over them, the way he protected them, and the way he brought them closer together, he told them everything they needed to know. They were his family now, and he would always be theirs. The Thompson family's transformation wasn't immediate, crept into their lives quietly, in small, almost imperceptible ways. At first, they were too consumed with the logistics of rebuilding their lives to notice the shifts happening within themselves. Insurance claims, finding temporary housing, replacing lost belongings, that all seemed insurmountable. Yet amidst the chaos, Ash remained their steady anchor, reminding them of the strength they had found during the fire and the unity they had rediscovered since. Sarah, once meticulous to a fault, had always been the family's planner. Her calendar was color-coded, her to-do list endless, and her time spent moving from one task to the next. But after the fire, something inside her shifted. She began to see the fragility of it all, how quickly life could change in an instant. Her priorities started to realign. Mornings that had once been hurried and stressful were now slower, gentler. She began sitting with Ethan at breakfast, listening to him talk about school and his comic book ideas. She took more time to connect with Lily, asking about her music or her plans for the weekend. One evening, as Sarah sat on the couch stroking Ash's fur, Ethan came and snuggled up beside her, something he hadn't done in years. "I like it when we're all together," he said simply, resting his head on her shoulder. In that moment, Sarah realized that the fire hadn't just taken their home. It had stripped away the distractions and routines that had kept them from truly seeing one another. And now, they were building something new, something stronger. Michael's transformation was quieter but no less profound. Before the fire, he had been the classic provider, working long hours to ensure his family had everything they needed. But the fire had shaken him to his core. He had always believed it was his job to protect his family, and the idea that he had failed in that duty weighed heavily on him. Yet Ash's courage had shown him a different kind of strength, one that wasn't about control or physical protection, but about trust, resilience, and love. He started coming home earlier from work, surprising the kids with impromptu movie nights or taking them out for ice cream. He even began helping Ethan with his comic books, sitting at the kitchen table with a pencil in hand as they brainstormed ideas for Ash's next heroic adventure. The moments Michael once thought of as small or insignificant began to feel like the most important parts of his day. For Lily, the change was perhaps the most unexpected. At 15, she had been in the throes of teenage rebellion, her world revolving around her friends, her phone, and her music. The fire had shaken her in ways she didn't fully understand. She had been scrolling through social media when it happened, her headphones on, oblivious to the danger. If Ash hadn't been there, if her parents hadn't come to wake her, she might not have made it out. The experience left her introspective, more aware of the people around her. She started spending more time with Ethan, teaching him how to use her old tablet to draw his comics digitally. The two of them, who had once bickered constantly, began sharing quiet moments together, laughing over Ethan's exaggerated depictions of Ash or debating whether their superhero dog should have a cape. One night, as Lily was sketching a new design for Ethan's comic, she glanced over at Ash. who was lying by the fireplace. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think I didn't need anyone. Like, I could do everything on my own. But Ash, he makes me feel safe. Like, no matter what happens, we'll be okay." Ethan nodded solemnly. That's what heroes do. The transformation wasn't just internal. The Thompsons began to look outward, finding ways to share their story and use their experience to help others. Sarah, who had always loved animals but never had time to act on that passion, started volunteering at a local shelter. She brought the whole family along, and soon they were regular faces at adoption events, helping other animals find homes. Ethan loved playing with the dogs, and even Lily, who initially resisted, found herself drawn to the cats, snapping pictures of them to post on the shelter's website. Michael used his connections at work to organize a fundraiser for the shelter, rallying his colleagues to donate money and supplies. The event was a huge success, and when the shelter director handed Michael a plaque to thank the family for their efforts, he felt a swell of pride that was different from anything he had experienced in his career. Ash became the face of their outreach efforts. His story, shared through local newspapers and social media, resonated with people far beyond their community. Letters began arriving at their temporary homesome from people who had been inspired by Ash's bravery, others from families who had been through their own trials and found comfort in his tale. One letter, written by a woman who had recently adopted a rescue dog, brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "Your story reminded me that heroes come in all forms. My dog saved me from loneliness, just like Ash saved your family." Ethan was particularly proud of the comic book he created, titled Ash the Hero. He insisted on selling copies at adoption events, with all proceeds going to the shelter. At first, Sarah worried no one would be interested, but the little hand-drawn book was a hit. Ethan beamed with pride every time someone bought a copy, and Ash seemed to sense his importance, wagging his tail as kids came up to pet him and ask about the story. Through it all, Ash remained a constant thread that wove the family together. He seemed to know when someone needed comfort, nudging his head under Sarah's hand when she looked stressed, or resting his chin on Michael's knee during particularly tough days. He was Ethan's confidant, Lily's muse, and Sarah's quiet reminder of resilience. For Michael, he was proof that second chances were possible, that life could be rebuilt stronger than before. One quiet evening, as the family sat together in their temporary living room, Ethan spoke up. "Do you think Ash misses James?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken emotion. Sarah leaned forward, her hand resting on Ash's back. "I think he does," she said gently. "But I also think he knows James would want him to be happy. And I think Ash found us because he needed a new family." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "We needed him, too." That night, as Ash lay curled by the fireplace, Sarah watched him and thought about how much he had changed their lives. He had come to them as a scruffy, scarred stray, but he had become so much more: a protector, a healer, and a bridge to something greater than themselves. In saving them, Ash had taught them to save each other. And as she looked around the room, at her husband and children laughing together, Sarah realized that their family, though forever marked by the fire, was stronger than ever before. It had been nearly a year since the fire that changed the Thompsons' lives. In that time, their family had transformed in ways they never imagined. Their bond had strengthened, their outlook on life had deepened, and Ash had become an irreplaceable part of their story. Their new home was under construction, designed with fire safety and resilience in mind. While the physical scars of their ordeal were fading, the emotional lessons they'd learned remained sharp and clear. Ash, though older and showing signs of wear, was still the family's steadfast protector. His instincts for danger remained uncanny, his loyalty unwavering. But life, as they'd come to realize, had a way of testing even the strongest bonds. It was a warm summer evening, the kind that invited open windows and the hum of crickets. The Thompsons were spending the weekend at a rented cabin in the countryside, a temporary retreat while their new house was being completed. The cabin, surrounded by dense woods, offered a peaceful escape from the noise of the city. Ethan had spent the day exploring the trails with Ash, who padded quietly beside him, his tail wagging as they discovered small streams and patches of wildflowers. By the time evening rolled around, the family was settled around a crackling fire pit, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. Ash lay at Sarah's feet, his ears twitching now and then at the sound of distant wildlife. It was one of those rare moments of perfect contentment, where time seemed to stretch endlessly and all the worries of the world melted away. But Ash, ever vigilant, was uneasy. His ears perked up, his body stiffening as he lifted his head and sniffed the air. Sarah noticed first. "What is it, boy?" she asked, leaning down to pet him. His tail thumped once against the ground, but his attention remained fixed on the woods. Michael chuckled. "Probably just a raccoon or something. Nothing to worry about." Ash didn't move, his gaze unwavering. Sarah exchanged a glance with Ethan, who was already on his feet. "I think we should check it out," Ethan said, his voice tinged with concern. Michael sighed, putting down his marshmallow stick. "All right, let's take a look. But I'm telling you, it's probably nothing." Ash led the way, his movements purposeful and quick. The family followed, their flashlights cutting through the darkness of the woods. The further they walked, the more Sarah began to notice a faint, acrid smell in the air. It was subtle at first, but as they moved closer to the source, it grew stronger. Her heart began to race. "Smoke," she said quietly, the word hanging heavy in the air. They emerged into a clearing and saw a flicker of orange in the distance, small but unmistakable. A fire had started, likely from a stray ember or an unattended campsite. The flames were modest for now, but the dry underbrush crackled hungrily, and the wind carried sparks further into the woods. Michael swore under his breath, pulling out his phone to call for help. But as he dialed, Ash darted forward, barking furiously. "Ash, wait!" Ethan shouted, running after him. The family followed, their pace quickening as they realized Ash wasn't running aimlessly. He was heading toward the source of the fire, weaving through trees with a determination that sent chills through Sarah. When they caught up, they found Ash standing at the edge of a small campsite, barking at a tent that was partially collapsed. The fire was close now, the heat palpable, and the air thick with smoke. Michael moved closer, shouting, "Is anyone in there?" When no one answered, he stepped forward, pulling back the tent flap. Inside, they found two teenage campers, unconscious but breathing. The smoke had overcome them. "Help me get them out," Michael yelled, and Sarah rushed to his side. Together, they dragged the campers away from the fire, laying them on the ground a safe distance away. Ethan knelt beside them, his face pale. "Are they going to be okay?" he asked, his voice trembling. "They'll be fine," Sarah said, though her own fear was barely contained. She checked the teens' pulses and found them steady. "We need to get them out of here before the fire spreads." As Michael dialed 911 again to report the fire and their location, Ash began barking furiously, his body turned toward the deeper woods. Sarah grabbed his collar, but he pulled insistently, his strength surprising her. "What is it, Ash?" she asked, her heart pounding. She looked toward where he was pulling and saw a faint light flickering another fire. "The wind's carrying it," Michael said grimly. "It's spreading fast. We need to move." Ash refused to leave. He barked again, his body rigid, and Sarah realized with a sinking feeling that there was something or someone else out there. "I think he's trying to tell us something," she said. "We have to follow him." Michael hesitated, torn between the danger and the urgency in Ash's actions. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but stay close." Ash led them further into the woods, his barking relentless as the flames grew closer. They found an older man lying near a fallen tree, his leg pinned beneath a heavy branch. He was conscious but weak, coughing violently from the smoke. "I can't move," he rasped, his voice barely audible. Michael and Sarah worked together to lift the branch, their muscles straining against the weight. "Hold on," Michael said, his voice steady. "We'll get you out of here." Ash stood close by, barking at the encroaching flames as if daring them to come closer. Ethan held the man's hand, his small face set with determination. "We've got you," he said, his voice trembling but firm. Once the man was free, they helped him to his feet and began the slow trek back to the clearing where the teens were still unconscious. By the time they reached the campsite, the fire had grown significantly, and the sound of crackling would fill the air. The first responders had arrived, their voices cutting through the chaos as they worked to contain the blaze and evacuate the area. As the family handed the campers and the injured man over to the paramedics, Sarah realized that Ash was no longer by her side. Panic surged through her. "Where's Ash?" she shouted, spinning around. "Has anyone seen him?" Ethan's face crumpled. "He went back," he said, tears streaming down his face. He ran toward the fire. Without thinking, Sarah started toward the flames, but Michael grabbed her arm. "You can't," he said firmly. "It's too dangerous." "He's out there," Sarah cried, her voice breaking. "I can't just leave him." Before she could argue further, a firefighter called out, pointing toward the trees. They turned to see Ash emerging from the smoke, limping but determined. In his jaws, he carried a small bundle, a tiny, trembling puppy he had found in the woods. Sarah fell to her knees, overcome with relief and awe as Ash gently placed the puppy at her feet. "You're incredible," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as she wrapped her arms around him. "You're absolutely incredible." The family watched as the firefighters worked to contain the blaze. The injured were transported to safety, and the woods fell silent again. Ash, exhausted but triumphant, lay at Sarah's feet, his amber eyes soft but alert. Ethan knelt beside him, stroking his fur. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "You saved them." In the days that followed, news of the fire spread, and once again, Ash's heroism became the center of attention. But for the Thompsons, it wasn't about the recognition. It was about the reminder of what truly mattered: the strength of family, the courage to act in the face of fear, and the profound bond they shared with a dog who had changed their lives in ways they could never have imagined. Ash had faced his final test, and once again he had proved that he wasn't just a survivor. He was a hero. The days following the forest fire were marked by a quiet, reflective atmosphere in the Thompson household. Though the events had left them physically and emotionally drained, the overwhelming sense of gratitude for their survival and for Ash kept their spirits afloat. The fire had tested their courage, their love, and their resilience, and they had emerged from it closer than ever. Ash, though recovering, had become something of a legend in their community. The story of his bravery had spread quickly, reaching not only local news outlets but also national ones. Reporters contacted the Thompsons, eager to interview the family and meet the heroic dog who had saved so many lives. Ethan, always proud of Ash, eagerly recounted their adventures, while Sarah and Michael tried to keep the attention from overwhelming their family. Despite the recognition, life continued. The Thompsons focused on rebuilding their home, which was nearing completion. The house had been designed with fire safety in mind, including a memorial corner in the living room where they planned to display photos of Ash and James Carter, honoring the dog's journey and the firefighter who had been such a significant part of his life. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, Sarah sat on the porch with Ash lying beside her. His eyes were closed, his breathing steady but slow. She gently ran her fingers through his fur, her heart heavy with a mix of emotions. "You've done so much for us," she whispered. "I don't know if we'll ever deserve you, but we'll try." Ash's ears twitched, and his tail gave a faint wag, as though he understood. It was a moment of pure connection, one that didn't require words. The family decided to organize a community event to honor Ash and other rescue animals. Held at a local park, the event featured adoption booths, demonstrations by service dogs, and a special presentation about Ash's story. Ethan proudly displayed his comic book series, Ash the Hero, and donated all proceeds to the local animal shelter. Lily had created a photo exhibit showcasing images of Ash alongside quotes from people whose lives had been touched by rescue animals. When the time came for the ceremony, Michael took the stage, holding a microphone in one hand and a leash in the other. Ash stood beside him, his honorary firefighter badge glinting in the sunlight. Michael cleared his throat, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Ash isn't just a dog," he began. "He's a reminder of the strength we find in the most unexpected places. He saved us not just from a fire, but from losing sight of what truly matters. He brought our family closer, and through his bravery, he's shown us the power of love, loyalty, and resilience." The crowd erupted in applause, but Ash remained calm, his gaze fixed on Michael as if understanding every word. Ethan and Lily stood nearby, their faces glowing with pride, while Sarah wiped away a tear, her heart full. After the event, the family returned to their temporary home, exhausted but content. Ash lay by the fireplace, his favorite spot, while Ethan curled up beside him with a book. The family had created a tradition of gathering together each evening, sharing their highs and lows from the day. It was a small ritual, but it had become a cornerstone of their newfound closeness. As the days turned into weeks, Ash began to show signs of aging. His once boundless energy had slowed, and he spent more time resting, his body weary but his spirit undiminished. The family adjusted their routines to accommodate him, ensuring he was comfortable and loved. Ethan often sat by his side, reading aloud or sketching new comic book ideas, while Lily played soft music in the background, creating a calm and comforting environment. One crisp autumn afternoon, the family decided to visit James Carter's grave. They brought flowers and a framed photo of Ash wearing his honorary firefighter badge. Standing in the quiet cemetery, surrounded by trees ablaze with fall colors, Sarah spoke softly. "Thank you, James," she said, her voice trembling, "for everything, for raising a dog who would one day save our lives, for teaching us that bravery and love live on, even when we're gone." Ethan placed a photo by the headstone, his small hand resting on Ash's back. "We'll take care of him," he said. "I promise." The visit was bittersweet, but it felt like closer a way to honor James's legacy and acknowledge the journey that had brought Ash to them. As winter approached, Ash's health began to decline. The family knew the time they had left with him was growing short, but they focused on making each day special. They celebrated Ash's birthday with a cake shaped like a bone, showered him with affection, and surrounded him with the love he had given them so freely. One snowy morning, Ash didn't wake up. He lay peacefully by the fireplace, his body still, his expression serene. The family found him there, and though their hearts broke, they took solace in knowing he had lived a life of extraordinary purpose and love. The days that followed were filled with grief, but also with reflection. The family held a small memorial for Ash, inviting neighbors and friends who had been touched by his story. They shared memories, laughed through tears, and celebrated the life of a dog who had changed their lives forever. The Thompsons moved into their new home shortly after, carrying Ash's memory with them. The memorial corner in the living room became a place of honor, with photos, Ethan's comic books, and the honorary badge displayed prominently. Ash's presence was felt in every corner of the house, a quiet but powerful reminder of the bond they had shared. Years later, Ethan published a graphic novel based on his comic series, Ash the Hero. The book became a bestseller, inspiring readers around the world with its message of courage and love. In interviews, Ethan always spoke about the real Ash, describing him as the best friend anyone could ever have. Lily pursued photography, her work often focusing on themes of resilience and connection. One of her most famous pieces was a portrait of Ash lying by the fireplace, his eyes wise and knowing. The image became iconic, a symbol of the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. Sarah and Michael continued their work with rescue animals, founding a nonprofit in Ash's name that provided support for shelters and education on fire safety. The organization grew, helping thousands of animals and families across the country. The legacy of Ash extended far beyond the Thompsons' lives. It reached into the hearts of everyone who heard his story, reminding them of the power of loyalty, courage, and love. For the Thompsons, he wasn't just a dog. He was family, a hero, and a bridge to a deeper understanding of what it meant to live fully and love fiercely. And though Ash was gone, his spirit lived on in their home, in their hearts, and in every life he had touched.